Welcome to Deleted Saves. On this episode, Dead Space on Xbox 360. In the vast depths of space, to liberally paraphrase a movie, no one can hear you scream, or huff, yell, swear, question aloud the decisions that brought you to this place, or fill your vacuum-sealed suit with the contents of your bowels. But we'll talk about that and more, as our mostly silent protagonist doesn't, with today's topic, 2008's Dead Space. Dead Space is a somewhat from out of nowhere science fiction horror game that landed quietly onto the faltering survival horror genre in the late 2000s. As the creation of EA Redwood Shores, soon to be renamed Visceral Studios, a collaboration between Glenn Schofield, who I believe receives majority credit for the concept, and his then business partner Michael Condrey. The term Dead Space can mean a few things. It may mean air that is inhaled but does not play a role in gas exchange, such as when we breathe. Or it may mean a space which cannot be engaged with direct fire in a military conflict. I believe both of these definitions fit what occurs during the game. This is unusual because EA was becoming less and less a publisher that would try anything or make movie tie-in games, and instead was becoming more dependent upon milking winning franchise formulas to death during this time. So after some rather successful lobbying on their part, Schofield and Condrey were able to convince EA to give them a shot at developing their own title, a sequel to the legendary title System Shock. At first, EA was lukewarm on the idea as they developed it, but with the incredibly successful release of a completely different game, Resident Evil 4, that caused Schofield and Condrey to completely retool the development of their game, and in turn got EA more excited, especially if there was money in it. In Dead Space, you play as Isaac Clarke, a portmanteau of the names of famous sci-fi authors Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke, if you didn't already know that bit of the lore around the game. The game takes place well into the 26th century, a time when humanity has grown far too numerous to be contained on our home world of Earth and has expanded to the stars. But in return for such deep space exploration and colonization, life has become cheap and short, as it is hardly unusual for people to die at young ages in accidents during colonization of harsh planets, or at deep space corporate mining concerns. Humanity has developed quote-unquote planet crackers, a type of interstellar resource mining ship designed specifically to rip open uninhabited planets and strip them of their mineral or metallic wealth to feed the insatiable hunger of humans. Isaac is not a soldier, captain, or anyone else of importance. He is an engineer, or their version of an engineer, which is something of a combination between grease monkey and IT guy, only there to temporarily fix shit when it breaks down due to age, wear, tear, and overall abuse. When the USG Ishimura, the oldest ship in the fleet of the Concordance Extraction Company, or CEC, a massive conglomerate mining company, goes missing, Clarke gets himself on a ship intent on finding where the Ishimura was last recorded to be, especially because his girlfriend Nicole is one of the medical staff on that ship. Clarke and crew find the ship floating lifeless in a deep space near a planet named Aegis 7, where the Ishimura has already started breaking the planet up. Something is wrong, because of course it is. This is a horror game after all. After crash landing on the Ishimura, that's a name you'll hear a lot in this game, the party soon finds itself aboard a massive ship with no crew and lots of bloodstains. When trying to figure out what happened, the crew is attacked by some sort of unknown entities, things of mutated flesh and too many limbs. It quickly begins to tear the group apart, and Clarke has to flee deeper into the ship to escape, running for his life until he stumbles across a maintenance closet where he finds his trusty weapon for the game, a plasma cutter, a type of handheld plasma laser device meant to slice asteroids into thin sheets with precise shots. Turns out, the thing also works great on dismembering the beasts Isaac will be fighting all game long, along with an assortment of mining tools being pressed into service to fight the seemingly endless horde of crazed undead things contained within the tomb the Ishimura has become. Mining tools as weapons is one of the gimmicks of Dead Space, meant to reinforce that Clarke is a tech guy, not a soldier, and that he would of course be a lot more familiar with the 26th century's version of power drills and chainsaws, rather than rifles or shotguns. Plus, the fact that you need to dismember the enemy, not to kill them but just to make sure they are no longer mobile, was a dig at shooters of the period, who are obsessed with getting headshot kills on enemies and other players in multiplayer games. And don't worry, the game will remind you at least 5 times in the first 10 minutes of the game that you need to cut the enemies apart. As the game progresses, Clark will shoot, lance, blast, and sonically annihilate his enemies with a variety of weapons gained through donating schematics to the in-game store, the place he trades in the credits he finds. You know, credits, non-denominational future space cash. Littered about the ship from within the pockets of the dead, along with audio logs and text logs usually captured, through strange coincidence, from the last moments of the former crew before they all died horribly. Clark will say very little beyond the occasional grunt or yawp as he stomps with his massive boots and swings his fists in between shots, or just breathes heavily. He will also get ordered around by every asshole left on the ship, whether his own crew or the Ishimura's absolutely batshit insane survivors, just to keep the ship floating a little bit longer in ever-escalating ridiculous situations in which Clark searches for Nicole. The worst being an automated anti-asteroid defense system minigame. Don't get me started on that one. Oh, did I mention that everyone is hallucinating and losing their minds? Because one of the side effects of the plague that is sweeping the ship is insanity. The big reveal here is that the original crew of the Ishimura discovered something called the Marker on Aegis 7, mainly through interacting with a very small colony force on the planet, who was supposed to leave once large-scale stripping of the planet began. The on-planet crew found it first, and soon began seeing their dead relatives and started chopping each other up with whatever they can get a hold of. And the crazy got on the Ishimura. Worse, it was an illegal operation, being funded by the Church of Unitology, a less than subtle hint that the writers were ripping on the space ghost worshipping Church of Scientology, funnily enough founded by Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke's less than stellar contemporary fellow writer L. Ron Hubbard, to find this fucking thing because they believe it will bring humanity into glorious convergence, as is promoted by the religion's martyred founder Michael Altman from a few centuries earlier when he found one on Earth. What the markers do instead is drive everyone near them crazy and turn dead bodies into massive conglomerations of muscle and knives who exist only to make more of themselves. Eventually, after nearly 12 chapters of jump scares, unsettling ambient noises, Isaac's heavy breathing, staring at vents you just know are full of monsters, and the horrendous smell of burnt ozone, just about everyone is dead but Clark and the ship's navigator and computer girl Kendra. When all hope seems lost, and Clark realizes he might just be going crazy before he dies, we get 2 big back-to-back reveals, so spoilers if you haven't played the games to this point. The first reveal is that Kendra is a completely unsavory bitch, and is in fact double-dealing both the CEC and the Church of Unitology, intent on taking the marker to them to see who will pay her the most money for it, or at least to get it out of the Aegis 7 system. She makes off with it, but the Nicole figure goading Isaac reroutes her escape ship back to the Ishimura, where she jettisons herself to the planet below. A planet about to be hit by the Ishimura and the giant chunk of rock that it tore off the planet before everyone lost their minds and is falling out of orbit after a valiant 12-hour campaign to keep it afloat, and Clark must give chase with the quote-unquote Nicole at his side and pilot the marker to the surface of the planet. When he does, Kendra outsmarts him for the marker he has laboriously moved through the planetside facility. Kendra then makes the second reveal. Nicole, the medical girlfriend of Isaac, who he has seen and talked to at a distance, and weirdly kept ending her conversations with the phrase "make us whole," has been dead this whole time via suicide, and what Clark saw was the marker forcing Clark to work for it in Nicole's guise. Isaac then runs through the facility until he retrieves the marker from Kendra, only to watch her get smashed flat by a titanic necromorph, the on-the-nose name for those mad undead, space worm, which Clark must then shoot the glowing yellow pus sacs off of in order to kill it, and escape the planet before the whole damn thing blows up. He does, and we see his face for the first time as he removes his helmet. Only that's not true, because if you quickly free-rotate the camera during the first few minutes of the game, when we meet everyone, you can see his face without the helmet, and we get one last jump scare before the credits roll. Holy shit, this game is a ride, and one I really loved. Hell, even the chapter titles get involved in the story, a knowing wink from the developers that reveals the crux of the story, provided you realize what the first letter of each chapter spells out. To be honest, I'm actually not sure how I found out about First Dead Space as a title, as I didn't play it until 2010. I'm pretty sure I first heard about it while watching a backlog of episodes of Zero Punctuation, the Escapist flagship title show hosted by Ben Yahtzee Croshaw. He hated the game, and I figured if it was a game that Yahtzee hated, I'd likely love it, as he's another professional games critic and writer with whom I disagree with about half the time, and I'm quite sure neither of us would care about the other's opinions on that personal level. I think I then stumbled across it in the gameplay backlog of one of the early YouTubers' Let's Plays. I don't recall which one, but one of the ones who screams at every fuck thing trying to ape the style of YouTube's shit-stained trailblazer PewDiePie. Despite the player's caterwauling, I found the gameplay intriguing and sought out a copy of my own. Now, initially, Dead Space sounded like a hybrid of Silent Hill, the first Silent Hill, mind you. Longtime listeners know how I feel about the rest of them, and Ridley Scott's Alien. What we got instead was Resident Evil 4 in space. Well, duh. Obviously, as it is a direct inspiration, mixed with James Cameron's Aliens. It is also heavily referencing the cult classic sci-fi horror movie Event Horizon. Just a mindfuck of a movie. Go see it if you haven't. And I would have loved this game either way it came to us. Yes, I know some people don't believe Dead Space is a survival horror game, citing that it doesn't fit those tropes. And it is a something something else horror, pick your subgenre. And to those folks I say, first, fuck you, you dead-eyed pedantic jerk. There's combat survival of supernatural monsters and mind games. If you want to count those out, then count out Resident Evil and Silent Hill, who both have the very same tropes and solidify the genre. Second, I say that despite the use of jump scares, it is really the atmosphere that does the heavy lifting of the scares. With sound design that would unsettle anyone, and a brooding tone upon a half-lit derelict ship where escape is practically impossible. More modern raspberry jam-filled run-and-hide simulators that try to pass themselves off as horror just don't compare. But then again, times and tastes change, I suppose. Dead Space was an absolute success. A great knocked it out of the park on the first try game. Critics, except you know who, loved it, and the sales exceeded what parent publisher EA expected of both EA Redwood Shores, as a developer, and the game's ability to generate revenue. Which, when one is speaking of EA, then revenue comes before anything else. Sadly, what we would expect of an American corporation, but it's the dirty truth of how business gets done. It still gets recommendations to this day, and often shows up not only on lists of greatest games of all times, but greatest of the 7th generation of consoles, which is where the Xbox 360 sat and where I first experienced the game. Needless to say, a sequel was greenlit as soon as it could possibly be. Dead Space is one of those games that I replay at least once a year or so. It is just that good. At a time when even the storied Resident Evil was starting to flag with sequelitis, and Silent Hill had long turned down the road from good to utter trash, Dead Space was the buoy survival horror players needed to bridge the gap until the genre could right itself and keep us all going for a few years longer. But like any hero, if you survive long enough, you will see yourself become the villain. However, we'll get to that another time. There's still more story to chew through. For now, though, if you can find it somewhere, do play Dead Space if you haven't already. The PC port has its issues, mainly with controller and mouse lag, but those have mostly been fixed by now, and I hate playing with keyboard and mouse anyway. Sorry, PC gamers. I never liked it because I always found it to be physically uncomfortable, and that's the end of it. And on PC is likely the best way to experience it now, as trying to find a working console from that generation that haven't red-ringed into oblivion is becoming harder to do, and copies of this game from then may also be becoming more rare. However, you play it, this game is a treat for the senses. Altman be praised. Thank you for listening.